Dotty Dunn Hat, which became a staple of Southern California retail. At its peak, the company operated dozens of retail hat shops, specializing in affordable yet fashionable women's headwear during the era when hats were an essential part of daily attire. The business was headquartered first in St. Paul, Minnesota, owned as a subsidiary of Strong & Lightner, and was one of a northwestern regional chain of millinery shops whose lines included gloves, handbags, and accessories, as well as millinery, and later in Los Angeles, California, with its main office and warehouse facilities located on South Grand, Los Angeles. The owners were Strong & Lightner of St. Paul, Minnesota, then Strong & Warner, and later in California by Wilfred L. Brown and Warren W. Brown, known as Brown & Brown. Dotty Dunn expanded from a local business into a recognizable Western U.S. chain, with locations in major shopping districts including California, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Montana, and Washington. Strong & Warner Wholesale Millinery was a prominent St. Paul business in the early 20th century, located in a 7-story building at 65 to 73 East 7th Street. The building at the specific address of 67 East 7th Street no longer houses this company, as the millinery business went out of style and the company was part of a larger merger and the area's redevelopment over the decades. The original company was a leading wholesale millinery firm, part of an industry that made St. Paul known as a hub for feather fashion and a major wholesaling center for the Northwest. The company was located near other major wholesale firms like Finch, Van Slyck, and McConville Company, which after a merger with Lynn Keep, Warner & Sons, became the city's largest wholesale dry goods firm. Today, the area around 67 East 7th Street in St. Paul's Lower Town District features various modern businesses and residential properties, including apartment buildings and local shops. The original building for Strong & Warner Company is not a standing historical landmark associated with its original use in the same way some other historic commercial blocks in the city are, such as the Finch Building, which still has an addition standing at 381 Wall Street. Millinery in St. Paul. During the early 1900s, St. Paul was a bustling hub for millinery, attracting customers seeking fashionable wide-brimmed hats adorned with artificial flowers, genuine bird feathers, and luxurious fabrics sourced from Milan and Paris. Major retailers and wholesalers such as M. Philipsborn Company, J. Rothschild & Company, Mannheimer Brothers, and S. W. Weiss & Company maintained prominent millinery departments, offering elaborate and high-quality hats. Some hats featured ostrich plumes up to 3 feet long, which were highly prized and often bleached or dyed to match gowns. St. Paul milliners Local millinery associations, such as the Millinery Jobbers Association, coordinated conventions, social events, and trade collaborations, demonstrating the business prominence and widespread community engagement of millinery firms during this era. Retailers often competed to display the most artistic and lavish hats in advertisements and store windows. There were 3 extraordinary years in St. Paul millinery, 1908, 1909, and 1911. Prosperous St. Paul milliners in the early 1900s periodically traveled to Milan, Paris, and other fashion centers of Europe, where they viewed the latest styles in ladies' hats and purchased luxurious materials for construction of similar hats at their downtown St. Paul businesses. St. Paul belles flaunted the finest in millinery fashion, and millinery establishments flourished amid a fashion fad that survived flames and felons, but soon fell to a new fad. The word millinery originated centuries ago in the fashion center of Milan, Italy. It described fine fabrics and ribbons that came from Milan and were combined to create fashionable hats. Over time, in the United States, the word came to mean the making and selling of ladies' hats. In St. Paul, a bustling Midwest fashion center in the early 1900s, the word millinery described enormous wide-brimmed ladies' hats that local milliners trimmed with mounds of artificial flowers and genuine bird feathers. Across the United States in the early 1900s, more than 83,000 wholesale and retail milliners decorated hats with the colorful feathers of North American birds, such as pheasants, orioles, ospreys, woodpeckers, blue jays, quails, egrets, eagles, swans, and turkeys. But the most prized plumes were the graceful, fluffy feathers of the North African ostrich. Ostrich feathers, in lengths of 6 inches to 3 feet, promised elegant height and pomp for any lady's hat and could be bleached to a stunning white or dyed to complement the color of any gown. Ostrich farms flourished in California, Arizona, Texas, Arkansas, and Florida, and supplied coveted ostrich plumes for millinery. Hats were elaborately decorated with the wings of birds or even entire birds. Fire feather. Amid a fierce winter storm on Friday, January 29, 1909, a fire in downtown St. Paul threatened to destroy the city's retail district, where M. Phillips Bourne Company and other retailers specialized in women's clothing and hats. The fire started at 7:30 p.m. from unknown causes on the second floor of the 4-story White House department store on the northeast corner of 7th and Cedar Street. In a short time, flames burst through the roof and the entire 4 floors collapsed. Total damage in the city was estimated at more than $13 million in today's dollars. Insurance fully covered the loss of the White House. At other businesses, not all losses were covered by insurance. Feather felons. The first week of August 1911, the owner of S.W. Weiss & Company millinery store in downtown St. Paul received an alarming circular from a member of the Millinery Trade Review headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. The flyer had been mailed to all Midwest members of the Millinery Jobbers Association and to the chief of police in all the larger cities. It warned milliners and police officers to be on the lookout for an interstate thief who had robbed an Indianapolis, Indiana wholesale millinery of $1,000 of fine ostrich plumes, $33,000 in today's economy. The flyer included a detailed description of the thief, who was thought to be 29-year-old John Lewis of Louisville, Kentucky, later identified as Peter Jewell, a thief and a desperate armed escapee from the state prison at Stillwater. Late Saturday afternoon, August 12th, Samuel Weiss spotted Lewis loitering at the store located at 234 East 4th Street. Plainclothes Detective Frank Frazier, a 20-year veteran of the police force, was immediately dispatched to the scene. At 3rd and Market Streets, Frazier approached Jewell from behind and placed his hands on Jewell's shoulders, informing him he was arrested. Jewell wheeled around, drawing a revolver from his hip pocket, and fired at the officer. The bullet entered the officer's abdomen and pierced several internal organs. An ambulance carried Detective Frazier, age 48, to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he died of his wounds. Feather finale. Feather fashion fell from favor as social activists turned their attention to the protection of wildlife. The National Audubon Society established birdwatching as a commendable pastime for genteel ladies, and the organization championed the efforts of conservatives and wildlife enthusiasts in a campaign against the destructive fashion of feathers, which caused the deaths of millions of birds each year. Prominent supporters included President Theodore Roosevelt. In New York City, in 1913, Congress enacted a law which placed all migratory birds under federal protection. In Catholic tradition, the practice of women wearing hats or veils during Mass is rooted in historical customs and cultures rather than a current universal requirement. In earlier centuries, women were expected to cover their heads in church, often with veils, mantillas, or hats. This was based on interpretations of 1 Corinthians 11, which speaks about head coverings during prayer. Until 1983, the Code of Canon Law included this expectation, but the revised code no longer mandates it. Current practice. Today, wearing a hat or veil is optional in most Catholic communities. Many women choose to do so as a sign of reverence or tradition, especially in more traditional or Latin Mass settings. In some cultures, e.g. Spain, parts of Latin America, mantillas remain popular during special occasions like weddings or Holy Week. Why some still do it: personal devotion and modesty, cultural heritage or family tradition, aesthetic preference for formal attire during liturgy. In 1983, the Catholic Church introduced a new Code of Canon Law, which replaced the 1917 version. This revision removed the previous requirement for women to cover their heads during Mass. What changed? 1917 Code of Canon Law, Canon 1262, explicitly stated that women should cover their heads in church. 1983 Code of Canon Law. This provision was omitted, meaning head coverings became optional rather than mandatory. Why the change? The update reflected a broader effort to simplify and modernize church law after the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965. The Church emphasized internal disposition of reverence over external signs, like head coverings. Cultural norms had shifted significantly by the late 19th century, and the Church adapted accordingly. So, after 1983, wearing hats or veils became a matter of personal choice, not a legal obligation. The 1983 change in canon law that removed the requirement for women to wear head coverings during Mass had a ripple effect on the millinery, hat-making industry, especially in regions where Catholic women were a significant customer base. Impact on the U.S. millinery business. Decline in demand for church hats. Before 1983, hats and veils were considered essential for Sunday Mass, creating steady demand for milliners. Once the rule became optional, many women stopped wearing hats to church, reducing this market segment dramatically. Shift in fashion trends. The late 19th century already saw a decline in formal hat wearing in everyday fashion. The canon law change accelerated this trend by removing one of the last strong cultural reasons for women to buy hats regularly. Industry contraction. Many small millinery shops closed or pivoted to other products, e.g. bridal accessories, fascinators for special events, rather than church attire. Large hat manufacturers shifted focus to special occasions like weddings, horse races, Kentucky Derby, and fashion events rather than church attire. Prominent wholesale milliners included Strange and Warner Co., which occupied a 7-story building at 65 to 73 East 7th Street, Robinson Strauss & Co., importers and jobbers, ribbons, silks, millinery goods, filling 10,000 square feet of floor space in a 6-story building at 213 to 223 East 4th Street, and S.W. Weiss & Co., 234 East 4th Street. These ambitious, prosperous wholesalers actively participated in a Midwest fraternity of milliners and feather merchants established in 1892 as the Millinery Jobbers Association. Through their leadership and business expertise, the city of St. Paul became known as a hub for feather fashion. In 1908, delegates of the association eagerly accepted an invitation to visit St. Paul in Minneapolis as part of an elite annual convention. St. Paul MN. Cora A. Oderson traveled around the country opening Dotty Dunn stores. The Brown family was truly a remarkable family. When Michael G. Brown was born on April 28, 1949 in Essex, Ontario, Canada, his father, Archibald, was 37 and his mother, Susanna, was 39. He married Mary Jane Belcher on May 24, 1875 in Leamington, Ontario, Canada. They had 6 children in 29 years. His occupation was farming. He died on June 17, 1922 at the age of 73. When Lincoln Ross Brown was born on February 13, 1881 in Leamington, Ontario, Canada, his father, Michael, was 32 and his mother, Mary, was 22. He married Zoe E. Foden and they had 2 children together. He then married Mary Elizabeth Lebbins on July 1, 1932, in Millbank, South Dakota. He worked in wholesale millinery for Strange and Warner in St. Paul. He owned Brown's Hat Shop on Nicollet Ave from 1925 to 1933. He then worked for Helen Barham's Millinery as treasurer from 1938 to 1946. L.R. Brown, at the age of 29, lived at 2008 Laurel Ave, St. Paul, Minnesota, in 1910 as head of household, along with Zoe, his wife, age 27, and Lauren, his son, age 5, listed as salesman millinery, Dorothy, his daughter, age 2, and Wilfred, his brother, age 21, and a servant named Lavinia Skoglund, who was 19 years old, from Sweden. L.R. was listed as commercial salesman, wholesale millinery industry. In 1910, L.R. lived at 2098 Laurel Ave in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 1936, L.R. lived at 1737 11th Street, Minneapolis. In 1947, he moved to 131 Annandale Road, Pasadena, California, with his wife, Mary. It was close to Annandale Country Club. L.R. loved golf. He started L.R. Brown's Hats Wholesale on 728 South Hill Street, Los Angeles, known as Ladies' Hats That Sell. He later opened a small grocery store in Pasadena on York Avenue. It did not last long. After retiring in 1962, they sold the Annandale house and moved to 410 Waldo Avenue, Pasadena apartment. He died of cancer on August 24, 1964, in Pasadena, California, at the age of 83, and was buried in Altadena. He was buried at Mountain View Cemetery, Altadena. When Mary Elizabeth Lebbins was born on April 14, 1903, in Wilmont, Minnesota, her father, John, was 24, and her mother, Elizabeth, was 22. She married Lincoln Ross Brown on July 1, 1932, in Millbank, South Dakota. She died on May 6, 2000, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the age of 97, and was buried there. In 1920, Mary, age 17, was a waitress in her father's John Levin's Cafe in Wilmont, Minnesota. In 1930, at age 27, she was a hairdresser at P.H. Levin's Beauty Shop on Chicago Street, Minneapolis. Mary was a nephew of Peter H. Levin's. In 1950, she was a Dotty Dunn store supervisor at the Hill Street store. Later, she advanced to window decorator for Dotty Dunn Western U.S. stores. Each season, she would travel to each store and dress the store windows with new hats. June Poole, her sister, and her son Stephen Poole would make several trips to the Riverside CA store. We enjoyed the Riverside Inn outside buffets. When Wilfred Lester Brown was born on June 9, 1889, in Leamington, Ontario, Canada, his father Michael was 40 and his mother Mary was 30. He married Maiseli Ione Brown on August 17, 1934, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He died on December 11, 1967, in Los Angeles, California, at the age of 78, and was buried in Pasadena, California. Wilfred Brown was a prominent business figure in Glendale, California, and the co-founder and president of Dotty Dunn, a widely successful chain of millinery hat shops. According to historical business and city records from the mid-20th century, Dotty Dunn Millinery, Brown co-founded the Dotty Dunn brand, which became a staple of Southern California retail during the era when hats were an essential part of daily attire. Business leadership. He served as the president and executive head of the Dotty Dunn Corporation. The business was headquartered in Los Angeles, with its main office and warehouse facilities located on Grand Ave. Expansion. Under his leadership, Dotty Dunn expanded from a local Southern California business into a recognizable regional chain, with locations in major shopping districts including Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego. Death. He passed away in 1969 at the age of 79. His death marked an era for the business as the millinery industry faced significant decline in the late 1968 as fashion trends shifted away from formal hats. Warrington W. Brown was recognized specifically as a leader in the California retail and fashion industry. Warrington Warren Brown was born in 1904 in St. Paul, Minas. His father was 23 and his mother, Zoe, was 23. He married Ruth Gold in 1936. He died in 1969 in Glendale, California, at the age of 65 and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, along with his mother, Zoe Brown, and his sister, Dorothy Brown. Warren Brown's first house in Los Angeles was at 8616 Olympic in 1940 and later in 1944 at 1616 Fair Oaks, South Pasadena in 1948 and finally at 1655 Capistrano Avenue in Glendale. When Dorothy Emmeline Brown was born on November 6, 1907 in St. Paul, Minnesota, her father, Lincoln, was 26 and her mother, Zoe, was 25. She had one son with David Lowenthal, Lowe. She died in August 1964 in Glendale, California, at the age of 56 and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial. She lived at her father's home in 1920 at 396 Holly Avenue, St. Paul, Ward 7, Ramsey, Minnesota. She graduated from East High School, Minneapolis, in 1923. In 1929, at the age of 21, she sailed alone from Havana, Cuba, to New York on the SS President Johnson, living at 549 W 156th Street, New York. The building was built in 1928 and is now 95 years old. The linear feet between the front and back of the lot. This is a 6-story home, so residents had to climb at least one set of stairs. She married David Lowe Sr. In 1940, she is listed as widowed, but actually divorced, living on University Place, New York. Her occupation is listed as actress in theater industry. Her rent is listed as $57.50. She married David Lowe in 1941. Her son, David Lowe Jr., was born January 5, 1942. They divorced. In 1950, she was living in an apartment at 819 South New Hampshire, Los Angeles, with occupation listed as bookkeeper for theater. She died in August 1964. When David Lowenthal, or Lowe, was born on February 28, 1913, in New York, New York, his father, Salomon, was 33 and his mother, Jenny, was 27. David Lowe was raised in humble circumstances. He had one son. He died on September 24, 1965, in Manhattan, New York, at the age of 52. David Lowe, 51, a Columbia Broadcasting System producer of television documentary shows, died September 24, 1965, following a heart attack at the Friars Club, a private East Side club in New York. He changed his name from David Lowenthal to stage name David Lowe. His father was Salomon Lowenthal, a Russian Jew who emigrated to New York in 1917. His occupation was owner of a dry goods store on Bassett Street, New York. His widow is the former Harriet Van Horn, a University of Rochester graduate who, as a student, edited the UR Tower Times and was campus correspondent for the Democrat and Chronicle. She is now a radio and television columnist for the New York World Telegram and other Scripps Howard newspapers. Known as the producer for CBS Reports during the early 1960s, his credits include some of the network's most editorially pointed and controversial documentaries: Harvest of Shame, Abortion and the Law, Ku Klux Klan, The Invisible Empire, and Who Speaks for Birmingham. Scholars point to Lowe as the person most responsible for Harvest of Shame. Even before he was hired at CBS, Lowe had repeatedly appealed to Fred Frindle by assigning Lowe to the project in the fall of 1959. Though he had served briefly as the director of news for the short-lived Dumont Network, which folded in 1955. Previously, he was executive director of NBC's National Education Project and programming consultant for the Granada Television Network of Great Britain. When he joined CBS Reports, Lowe was known as a lawyer and fundraiser. He had also been an unsuccessful producer of Broadway plays. He produced 3 plays on Broadway. David Lowe's work unflinchingly addressed many of the most highly charged social issues of the day. Harriet Van Horn, a pioneer radio and television critic whose crusades for educational programming and against women's chatter programs, the vulgar outpourings of the soap opera, and the bad taste of commercials attracted a wide following in newspapers for a quarter of a century, died Thursday at New York Hospital. She was 77. Miss Van Horn, who later wrote a syndicated column for the New York Post, died of breast cancer, said a friend, Leslie Rubenstein. Miss Van Horn liked to say she got into television criticism the day they invented it. Jack Gould of the New York Times, John Crosby of the New York Herald Tribune, and Miss Van Horn were the early critics most admired and feared in the late 1940s and early 50s. In those days, many programs originated in New York and were broadcast live. It is known as television's golden age, but she remembered it as a less precious metal. In 1976, she was interviewed by Nora Ephron for Esquire. Ephron asked her to think about all the years she had spent listening to the radio and watching television. She liked radio well enough, she said, until it occurred to her that by thinking and writing about it, she had become as dull and as intellectually sterile as everybody else in the radio business. But when she considered her work in television, it made radio programming look positively metaphysical. "It destroyed me," Miss Van Horn said. "I did a television column for 20 years, 5 columns a week, and I was always in a little screening room in the afternoon and at the television set at night. My reading program went to hell. Had I stayed in television, it would have killed me. Imagine reviewing I Love Lucy 20 times. Imagine reviewing Gunsmoke 20 times. It would rot anybody's brain." In later years, she had fond memories of shows like Playhouse 90, especially when she compared it with all the canned shows from Universal and all the crime and cowboys and so on. Later in her career, Miss Van Horn became a syndicated columnist for the New York Post, writing about almost anything 3 times a week. The column contained the old wit and graceful prose that her readers had prized, but it was not picked up by many papers in syndication because it could not be categorized. Harriet Van Horn was born May 17, 1920 in Syracuse, New York, and graduated from the College for Women of the University of Rochester in New York in 1940. She got her first full-time newspaper job at the Greenwich Time in Connecticut by running an ad in Editor and Publisher that began, "Blue-eyed blonde with a nose for news and a way with words, fresh out of college." Scoops were important in those days, and one of hers was a story and pictures of one of the Playboy Tommy Manville's many brief marriages. It helped her get a job at the New York World Telegram. In her long career, she also wrote for the World Journal Tribune, Newsday, the New York Times Syndicate, and the Los Angeles Times Entertainment Syndicate, and was a frequent guest on TV programs. When David Christopher Lowe Jr. was born on January 5, 1942, in Manila, New York, his father, David, was 28, and his mother, Dorothy, was 34. He married Alice Marie Fognan in 1965 in New York City, New York. He died on April 10, 2017, in Glendale, California, at the age of 75, and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. David Lowe Jr., the son of the late David Lowe and Dorothy Brown, died peacefully on Monday, April 10, after a lengthy struggle with Parkinson's dementia. A 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer and director, David started his career at CBS News, leading to 7 years at 60 Minutes. He produced many notable segments including Johnny Carson, Vladimir Horowitz, and Mikhail Baryshnikov. He treated TV specials for NBC, including Dear Mr. President and Johnny Goes Home, which led to the TV series TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes. Over his 50-year career, he produced, wrote, directed, and created various series, specials, and programming for all the major networks, as well as the History Channel, Animal Planet, Discovery, A&E, and Nickelodeon. As a respected professional, David also worked as a consultant and educator. He was a true friend and mentor to many, and his greatest joy was spending time with his family and friends, especially his beloved grandchildren. As a father and grandfather, he always encouraged, inspired, and guided them to embrace life and to pursue their passions. He is survived by his loving wife of 52 years, Alice Fognan Lowe, his children, Dave and Ted with his wife Leah, Megan and her husband Paul Waddle, and Monica and her husband Kirk Scott, his grandchildren, Devin Waddle and Liam Lowe, his mother, Sue Davidson Lowe, and sister, Ellen Lowe. Funeral services were held at the Wee Kirk o' the Heather Church, Forest Lawn, Glendale, California. Johnny Carson's Greatest Practical Jokes NBC Special. Johnny Carson was famous for his clever and elaborate practical jokes, surprising co-hosts, celebrities, and audience members with unexpected pranks that showcased his wit, timing, and playful personality. The 1983 NBC Special. Carson's pranks were compiled in the one-shot NBC special Johnny Carson's Greatest Practical Jokes, 1983, directed by David Lowe Jr., featuring friends and colleagues like Ed McMahon, Tim Conway, and Joan Rivers. The special includes hidden camera pranks, staged skits, and elaborate setups, exemplifying Carson's mastery of the art of surprise and humor. One notable prank featured in this special involved Joan Rivers, where Carson orchestrated a scenario using impersonators of Margaret Thatcher, poking fun at Rivers' jokes about the British royal family. He balanced elaborate planning with spontaneous reactions, creating humor that was both surprising and lighthearted. Another prank involved Ed McMahon, Carson's longtime co-host, emphasizing the playful rapport between the two. Examples of memorable practical jokes. Carson frequently incorporated humor in everyday situations and on camera. A few iconic examples include Myrtle Young and her potato chips. Carson secretly crunched one of her cherished, uniquely shaped chips, creating a hilarious moment of disbelief, then quickly reassuring her it wasn't hers. Egg fight with Dom DeLuise. During a magic trick gone wrong, Carson improvised an all-out egg fight on set, delighting the audience with chaotic, unscripted humor. Karnak the Magnificent. While primarily a sketch, his psychic character often involved playful, pun-based interactions with the audience and Ed McMahon that felt like gentle, practical jokes. Highlights of one-liners and jokes from practical moments. While many practical jokes were situational, Carson's one-liners and observational humor often set up spontaneous pranks. Some examples include, anything can happen in Hollywood, but something happens every time. If life was fair, Elvis would be alive and all the impersonators would be dead. A 2-year-old is kind of like having a blender, but you don't have a top for it. These lines, delivered with Carson's signature deadpan expression, often led to unexpected reactions, enhancing the prank-like atmosphere of his shows. Legacy of Carson's practical jokes. Carson's pranks highlight his playful personality, skill at timing and anticipation, and ability to blend planned setups with live reactions. Unlike scripted sketches, practical jokes created spontaneous comedy, making viewers and participants laugh simultaneously. His methods influenced late-night comedy and set a precedent for blending celebrity interactions with humor, often blurring the line between performance and real-life reactions. Carson's practical jokes remain celebrated as classic examples of television prank artistry, demonstrating how clever humor, timing, and charisma can turn ordinary moments into memorable comedy. David produced Fighting Back, Enough is Enough, a movie about an Italian deli owner forms a civilian patrol to stop neighborhood crime after his family was attacked on 2 different occasions. While politicians watch with interest his rising popularity, a vicious pimp will do anything to stop him. Grossed worldwide $3,355,948. David produced and directed Johnny Goes Home in 1982, a story where Johnny Carson goes back to his hometown of Norfolk, Nebraska to tell stories about his youth, reunite with old friends, and relive some memories. David produced Super Bloopers and Practical Jokes 1984 to 1992. Mabel Gould was the treasurer of Dotty Dunn for many years at the Grand Ave headquarters. She was married to Norman Gould, who had a single idea for the collapsible Christmas tree. He noticed that each Broadway store had a complete artificial tree in each department. He asked, "Where do you store all the trees for the many stores?" And they said, "We need a very large building." So he got a patent for a collapsible tree. Nothing more developed from it, and he died in 1971. But now I have seen collapsible trees in Home Depot. I checked the bow, and the listed patents have now been reissued by Chinese companies. The 1036 South Grand Dotty Dunn headquarters was in a 7,450-square-foot warehouse built in 1912. As you walked into the front door, an office area was built up to the right, offices for Brown & Brown, Mary Brown, Mabel Gould. Merchandise was stored in the rest of the warehouse. The 716 South Hill Street store was the main store. It was located in the Spreckles building and built in 1922. It is now a jewelry store. The store entrances all had a terrazzo floor with Dotty Dunn metal outline insert. Notice the Santa Ana store still has the old Dotty Dunn entrance terrazzo, but now is a boot store. Here is a cartoon titled Chance Meeting in front of the Dotty Dunn store at 716 South Hill Street in downtown Los Angeles, photo dated 1940s. Notice the hanging awning with Dotty showing. After Dotty Dunn shut down, many businesses are handymen and ADT security. The California stores. Kick-wear clothes 1962. There were also 59 stores in Midwest United States from 1934 to 1961, with a total of 59 Dotty Dunn stores. Little remains of many Dotty Dunn stores except for the many newspaper advertisements that remain.
Comfort page to me, the lady in the tutti frutti hat. Some people say I dress too gay, but every day I feel so gay. And when I'm gay, I dress that way. Something wrong with that? No. Americans tell me that my hat is high because I will not take it off to kiss a guy. But if I ever start to take it off, I do that once for Johnny Smith, and he is very happy with the lady in the tutti frutti hat. Let people say you dress too gay, but every day you feel so gay, and when you're gay you dress that way, there's nothing wrong with that.
The Inglewood store was managed by Jane Lungen. She had a very large aviary cage in the back room of the store, filled with dozens of parakeets. The birds were very amusing. Her husband, Herman, was an Inglewood police officer, seen with his new 1950s Studebaker Champion, along with Chief Cup. June Poole, Mary Brown's sister, was employed at the store in the 1960s. Her son, Stephen Poole, would also visit the store and see the parakeets. The store is now a ticket agency. Note the terrazzo entrance is now covered. Charlotte Bell was also a saleslady in the 1960s. Picture of one remaining Dotty Dunn gold pencil from the 60s.
grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear that pitter-pat, and that happy tune is your step? Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade, but I'm not afraid. This rover crossed over. If I never had a cent, I'd be rich as Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. Sunny side of the street.
Produced by Stephen Poole. Stephen was Mary Brown's nephew. The Poole family spent almost every weekend at the Annandale house. Steve loved playing in their backyard. We lived in an apartment in Inglewood and had no lawn. Steve was very amused by the outside incinerators that the single-family houses used. But these outside incinerators caused horrible smog conditions and were eventually eliminated. Steve would bring his parakeet, Pixie, to Pasadena, but not a good idea. Pixie escaped from his cage and flew up into a tree. We finally coaxed him to fly back to his open cage. Aunt Mary trimming roses at Annandale House. Note the right side of the house was a wonderful breakfast room. Aunt Mary admiring the orange tree in the Annandale house backyard. Steve and his uncle Lincoln Brown, Christmas 1952. Steve and Uncle Fred Levins, Aunt Mary's brother, enjoying the December California sun in the backyard 1952. Aunt Mary and Steve 1952. Norm Gould, Mabel Gould, Vincent and Stephen Poole, and Mary and Len Brown, Christmas 1957. Aunt Mary, June Poole, and Ginger the cat, 1957. Aunt Mary, Mabel Gould, Dotty Dunn, treasurer, and June Poole, 1957. Uncle Len and Steve in Annandale House, Den, 1957. Dotty Dunn, endorsement letter from Warren Brown for Stephen Poole's Eagle Scout Award. Steve and Cat Tommy, Uncle Dick, Mary's brother, June and Len, 1958. Aunt Mary at Steve's Inglewood High School graduation, 1961. Aunt Mary at Steve's California State Long Beach, 1966 graduation. Aunt Mary watching Jennifer Poole play the Thomas organ after their marriage in Buena Park, 1970.